Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly. I am Pemberton. This is part 4 to 6, the Great Sea Battle. At dawn the Greeks row out into the narrows and fall upon a Persian fleet too vast to maneuver in so tight a space. Ship foul ship, and the disciplined Greeks cut them to pieces. Xerxes watches from a throne on the headland, and Herodotus gives us the strangest moment of the day, how the warrior queen Artemisia escaped by ramming one of her own side ships, and how the king, deceived, praised her for it. My men have become women, he said, and my women men. By evening the sea is full of wreckage, and the great navy of the king is broken. Let us continue.
Then the Hellenes put out all their ships. As they were putting out from shore, the barbarians attacked them at once. The other Hellenes began backing their ships and were about to run them aground, but Aeneas of Pallene, an Athenian, drove forward with a ship and charged one of the enemy. His ship became entangled in combat, and the men could not get away, so the others joined the fight to help Aeneas. The Athenians say that the battle began in this way, but the Aeginetans say that the ship which had gone to Aegina to bring the sons of Iolcos was the one that began the fight. It is also reported that an apparition of a woman was seen by them, and that after appearing she encouraged them to fight, so that the whole army of the Hellenes heard it, first reproaching them with these words: "Madmen, how far will you still back your ships?" Opposite the Athenians the Phoenicians had been ranged, for they occupied the wing toward Eleusis and the west. Opposite the Lacedaemonians were the Ionians, who occupied the wing that stretched toward the east and Piraeus. Of these, a few were deliberately slack in the fight according to the instructions of Themistocles, but the greater number were not. I might now mention the names of many ship captains who destroyed ships of the Hellenes, but I will make no use of their names except in the case of Themistocles son of Androdamas and Phylacos son of Histios, both of Samos. I mention these and not the rest because, on account of this deed, Themistocles became despot of Samos, appointed by the Persians, and Phylacos was recorded as a benefactor of the king and received much land as a reward. The benefactors of the king are called Orisangi in the Persian tongue. So it was with these men. But the greater number of the Persian ships were disabled at Salamis, some destroyed by the Athenians and others by the Aeginetans. Since the Hellenes fought in order and held their stations, while the barbarians were no longer arranged in order and did nothing by design, it was likely that some such result would follow, as in fact did. Yet on this day they far surpassed the way they had fought by Euboea, every man being eager and fearing Xerxes, and each thinking that the king was looking especially at him. As for the rest, I cannot speak of them separately or say precisely how the barbarians or the Hellenes individually fought. But with regard to Artemisia, this is what happened, and from it she gained still more esteem than before from the king. When the king's affairs had fallen into great confusion, at this crisis a ship of Artemisia was being pursued by an Athenian ship. She could not escape, because other ships of her own side were in front of her, while her own ship, as it happened, was farthest advanced toward the enemy. She resolved what she would do, and doing it proved greatly to her advantage. While she was being pursued by the Athenian ship, she charged at full speed against a ship of her own side, manned by Calindians, in which Damosithemos, the king of the Calindians, was embarked. Now, even if it is true that she had had some quarrel with him before, while they were still about the Hellespont, I cannot say whether she did this intentionally or whether the Calindian ship happened by chance to fall in her way. But after she had charged against it and sunk it, she enjoyed good fortune and gained two advantages for herself. First, when the captain of the Athenian ship saw her charge against a ship manned by barbarians, he turned away and went after others, supposing that Artemisia's ship was either a Hellenic ship or was deserting from the barbarians and fighting for the Hellenes. Thus her first piece of good fortune was to escape and not be destroyed. Secondly, although she had done harm to her own side, this very act won her great reputation with Xerxes. It is said that the king, watching the battle, noticed her ship charging the other. One of those present spoke to him. "Master, do you see Artemisia, how well she is fighting, and how she has just sunk a ship of the enemy?" Xerxes asked whether this was truly Artemisia's deed, and they said that it was, for they knew very well the sign of her ship. They thought the ship she destroyed was surely one of the enemy. Besides the other things that happened fortunately for her, as I have said, there was also this: not one of the crew of the Calindian ship survived to become her accuser. In answer to what was said to him, Xerxes is reported to have spoken these words: "My men have become women, and my women men." So it is said that Xerxes spoke. Meanwhile, in this struggle Ariobanes, commander, son of Darius and brother of Xerxes, was slain, and many others of note among the Persians, Medes and allies were slain too. Of the Hellenes only a few died. Since they knew how to swim, those whose ships were destroyed, if they were not killed in hand-to-hand fighting, swam over to Salamis. Of the barbarians the greater number perished in the sea, because they could not swim. When the first ships turned to flight, then the largest number died, for those stationed behind, trying to pass with their ships to the front, so that they too might show some deed of valor for the king to see, ran into the ships of their own side as they fled. It also happened in this confusion that some Phoenicians whose ships had been destroyed came to the king and accused the Ionians, saying that through them their ships had been lost, and that they had betrayed the cause. But it turned out that the Ionian commanders did not lose their lives, while the Phoenicians who accused them received the reward I shall tell. While these men were still speaking, a Samothracian ship charged an Athenian ship. As the Athenian ship was being sunk by it, an Aeginetan ship came against the Samothracian vessel and rammed it. Then the Samothracians, being skilled javelin throwers, cleared the fighting men from the ship that had wrecked theirs by hurling missiles, then boarded it and took possession of it. This event saved the Ionians from punishment. When Xerxes saw that they had performed a great exploit, he turned on the Phoenicians, for he was exceedingly vexed and inclined to find fault with everyone, and ordered their heads to be cut off, so that after having been cowards themselves they would not accuse others who were better men. Whenever Xerxes, sitting just under the mountain opposite Salamis called Aigolios, saw anyone of his own side perform a deed of valor in the sea fight, he asked who had done it, and the scribes recorded the ship, captain's name, his father's name, and the city from which he came. Moreover, Ariaramnes, a Persian who was present, shared the fate of the Phoenicians, being their friend. They then proceeded to deal with the Phoenicians. In the meantime, as the barbarians turned to flight and were sailing out toward Phaleron, the Aeginetans waited for them in the passage and performed memorable deeds. While the Athenians in the confused tumult were disabling both the ships that resisted and those that were fleeing, the Aeginetans were destroying those that tried to sail away, and whenever any escaped the Athenians, they went at full speed and fell among the Aeginetans. Then the ship of Themistocles, which was pursuing an enemy ship, met the ship of Polycretos son of Creos the Aeginetan. Polycretos had charged a Sidonian ship, the same one that had captured the Aeginetan vessel keeping advance watch at Skyethos, in which sailed Pythias son of Iscanus. The Persians had kept Pythias in their ship, all cut to pieces as he was, marveling at his valor. The Sidonian ship was captured carrying this man along with the Persians I mentioned, and so Pythias came safely to Aegina. When Polycretos looked at the Athenian vessel, he recognized the sign of the admiral's ship. Calling out, he addressed Themistocles with mockery about the accusation that the Aeginetans had taken the side of the Medes, and reproached him. Polycretos threw this taunt at Themistocles after charging the ship of Sidon. Meanwhile, those barbarians whose ships escaped destruction fled and came to Phaleron, under cover of the land army. In this sea fight the Aeginetans had the best reputation of all the Hellenes, and next to them the Athenians. Among individual men, the most renowned were Polycretos the Aeginetan, and the Athenians Eumenes of Anagyris and Amanias of Pallene, the man who had pursued Artemisia. If he had known that Artemisia was sailing in that ship, he would not have stopped until either he had taken her, or had been taken himself. Orders had been given to the Athenian captains, and a prize of 10,000 drachmas had been offered for the man who should take her alive, since they thought it intolerable that a woman should make an expedition against Athens. She, as has been said, had escaped, and the others whose ships had escaped destruction were also at Phaleron. As for Demantos, the commander of the Corinthians, the Athenians say that right at the beginning, when the ships were engaging in the fight, he was struck with panic and terror, raised his sails, and fled away. When the Corinthians saw the admiral's ship fleeing, they likewise departed. After this, as the story goes, when in their flight they came opposite the temple of Athensceres in the land of Salamis, a light vessel fell in with them by divine guidance. No one was ever found to have sent it, and it approached the Corinthians at a time when they knew nothing of what was happening with the fleet. From this it is conjectured that the matter was of the deity. When the men in the light vessel came near the ships, they spoke these words: Adamantos, you have turned your ships away and set out to flee, deserting the cause of the Hellenes, while they are in truth gaining victory and getting the better of their foes as much as they desire. When they said this, Adamantos doubted it, so they spoke a second time and said that they might be taken as hostages and killed if the Hellenes proved not to be gaining the victory. Then he and the others with him turned their ships back, and they reached the camp when the work was finished. This is the report spread by the Athenians against them. The Corinthians, however, do not admit that this is so, but maintain that they were among the first in the sea fight, and the rest of Hellas also bears witness on their side. Aristides, son of Lysimachos, the Athenian whom I mentioned a little before as a very good man, acted as follows in the turmoil that had arisen around Salamis. Taking with him a number of the hoplites of Athenian race who had been stationed along the shore of the land of Salamis, he disembarked with them on the island of Cydolia, and they killed all the Persians who were on this island. When the sea fight had been broken off, the Hellenes towed into Salamis as many of the wrecks as happened still to be nearby, and held themselves ready for another sea battle, expecting that the king would still use the ships that remained unharmed. But many of the wrecks were taken by the west wind, and carried to the strand in Attica called Coleus. This fulfilled not only all the other oracles spoken about the sea fight by Bacchus and Mucios, but especially, with reference to the wrecks cast up there, the oracle spoken many years before these events by Lysistratos, an Athenian who uttered oracles, which none of the Hellenes had noticed. Then the Colean women shall roast barley with fire, wood made of ores. This was destined to happen after the king had marched away. When Xerxes perceived the disaster that had come upon him, he feared that one of the Ionians might suggest to the Hellenes, or that they might themselves think of it, to sail to the Hellespont and break up the bridges. Then he might be cut off in Europe and run the risk of being utterly destroyed. Therefore he began to consider taking flight. But he wanted his intention to be hidden, both from the Hellenes and from his own side. So he tried to build a mole across to Salamis, and he bound together Phoenician merchant vessels, so that they might serve him both as a bridge and as a wall. He made preparations for fighting as if he were going to have another sea battle. Seeing him do this, all the rest felt sure that he had prepared himself in earnest and meant to stay and fight. But Mardonios did not fail to understand the true meaning of all these things, since through experience he was very well acquainted with Xerxes' way of thinking. While Xerxes was doing this, he sent a messenger to the Persians to announce the calamity that had come upon them. There is nothing mortal that completes a journey faster than these messengers, so skillfully has this been devised by the Persians. They say that according to the number of days in the entire journey, so many horses and men are stationed at intervals, each man and horse appointed for 1 day's journey. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night prevents each one from accomplishing the task set before him with the utmost speed. The first rider delivers the message entrusted to him to the second, and the second to the third. After that it passes through them, handed from one to another, like the torch race among the Hellenes, which they perform for Hephaestus. This kind of running of their horses the Persians call Angarian. The first message that came to Susa, announcing that Xerxes had Athens in his possession, so greatly rejoiced the Persians who had been left behind that they strewed all the roads with myrtle boughs, offered incense constantly, and continued in sacrifices and feasting. But the second message, which came to them after this, disturbed them so greatly that they all tore their garments and gave themselves without restraint to crying and lamentation, laying the blame on Mardonios. The Persians did this not so much because they grieved for the ships, as because they feared for Xerxes himself. This went on among the Persians for all the intervening time, until the coming of Xerxes himself caused them to cease. Mardonios, seeing that Xerxes was greatly troubled because of the sea fight and suspecting that he meant to flee from Athens, considered his own situation. He thought that he would have to suffer punishment for having persuaded the king to make an expedition against Hellas, and that it would be better for him to run the risk either of subduing Hellas or of ending his own life honorably, placing his safety in suspense for a great end. His own opinion, however, was rather that he would subdue Hellas. Having reckoned these things up, he addressed the king. Master, do not be grieved, and do not feel great trouble because of what has happened. Our whole fortune does not depend on a contest of timbers, but of men and horses. None of these men who now suppose that everything has been achieved by them will attempt to disembark from their ships and stand against you, nor will anyone on this mainland do so. Those who did stand against us paid the penalty. If therefore you think it good to do this, let us immediately attempt the Peloponnese, or if you think it good to hold back, we may do that. Do not lose heart, for there is no escape for the Hellenes from becoming your slaves, after first giving account of what they have done to you both now and in former times. This would be the best course. But if you have truly resolved to retire yourself and withdraw your army, I have another counsel to offer for that case too. O king, do not let the Persians become an object of laughter to the Hellenes. None of your affairs have suffered through the Persians, nor can you name any place where we proved ourselves cowards. If Phoenicians, Egyptians, Cyprians, or Cilicians prove themselves cowards, the calamity that followed does not belong in any way to the Persians. Therefore now, since it is not the Persians who are guilty toward you, follow my counsel. If you have determined not to remain here, withdraw to your own abode, taking with you the main body of the army, and then it must be for me, choosing 30 myriads from the army for this purpose, to deliver Hellas to you reduced to subjection. When Xerxes heard this, he was rejoiced and delighted as much as he could be after his misfortunes. He told Mardonios that after taking counsel he would answer and say which of these two courses he would take. So when he was taking counsel with those Persians who were called to be his advisers, it seemed good to him to send also for Artemisia, to give him counsel, because on the earlier occasion she alone had shown herself to understand what ought to be done. When Artemisia came, Xerxes sent away all the rest, both the Persian counselors and the spearmen of the guard, and spoke to her. Mardonios bids me stay here and make an attempt on the Peloponnese, saying that the Persians and the land army are not guilty of any share in my calamity, and that they would gladly give me proof of this. Therefore he bids me either do this, or else, if not, he himself desires to choose 30 myriads from the army and deliver Hellas to me reduced to subjection, and he bids me withdraw with the rest of the army to my own abode. Therefore, just as you gave good advice about the sea fight that was fought, urging that we should not bring it on, so now also advise me which of these things I shall do, so that I may succeed in deciding well. O king, it is hard for me to succeed in saying the best things when one asks me for counsel. Yet it seems good to me at present that you should retire back and leave Mardonios here, if he desires it and undertakes to do this, together with those whom he wishes to have. On the one hand, if he subdues those whom he says he wishes to subdue, and if the matters he has in mind when he speaks this way turn out well, the deed will after all be yours, master, since your slaves accomplished it. On the other hand, if the opposite of what Mardonios intends comes to pass, it will be no great misfortune, since you yourself will remain safe, and so will the power in those parts that concerns your house. For if you and your house remain safe, the Hellenes will have to pass through many contests, many times repeated, for their own existence. But if Mardonios suffers some disaster, no account will be made of him. And if the Hellenes conquer, they gain a victory that is no victory, having destroyed only one who is your slave. You, however, will retire after having done the thing for which you made your march. You have delivered Athens to the fire. Xerxes was greatly delighted with this advice, since she had succeeded in saying the very thing he himself meant to do. Not even if all the men and all the women in the world had advised him to remain would he have done so, I think, so deeply had terror struck him. Therefore he commended Artemisia and sent her away to conduct his sons to Ephesus, for certain bastard sons of his were accompanying him. With these sons he sent Hermotimos to have charge of them. Hermotimos was by race of Padasa, and in the king's estimation, second to none of the eunuchs. Now the Padasians live above Halicarnassos, and at this Padasa the following thing happens. Whenever some trouble is about to come within a certain time to the whole body of those who dwell about this city, the priestess of Athene there grows a long beard, and this has happened to them twice before now. Of these Padasians was Hermotimos. This man, of all persons we know up to this time, obtained the greatest revenge for a wrong done to him. He had been captured by enemies and was being sold, and Panionios, a man of Chios, bought him. Panionios had set himself to make his living by the most impious practices. Whenever he obtained boys who possessed some beauty, he would make eunuchs of them, and then take them to Sardis or Ephesus, and sell them for large sums of money, since among the barbarians eunuchs are considered more valuable in all matters of trust than those who are not eunuchs. Panionios then made eunuchs of many others, since this was how he made his living, and also of this man of whom I speak. Hermotimos, however, was not unfortunate in everything. He was sent from Sardis to the king with other gifts, and as time went on he came to be honored more than all the other eunuchs in the sight of Xerxes. When the king was then in Sardis and was setting the Persian army in motion to march against Athens, Hermotimos went down on some business to the part of Mysia occupied by the Chians, called Aturnius, and there he found Panionios. Recognizing him, he spoke many friendly words to him. First he recounted all the good things he had obtained through Panionios, and then he made promises in return, saying how many good things he would do for him if he brought his household and lived in that land. Panionios gladly accepted his proposals and brought his children and his wife. Then when Hermotimos had caught him together with his whole household, he spoke to him. You, who of all men who have ever lived up to this time gained your substance by the most impious deeds, what evil did I myself, or any of my forefathers, do either to you or to any of yours, that you made me nothing instead of a man? Did you suppose that you would escape the notice of the gods for the things you then devised? Following the rule of justice, they have delivered you into my hands because you committed impious deeds, so that you shall have no reason to find fault with the penalty that will be inflicted on you by me. When Hermotimos had reproached him in this way, Panionios' sons were brought into his presence, and Panionios was compelled to make eunuchs of his own sons, who were 4 in number. Being compelled, he did so. Then after he had done it, the sons were compelled to do the same thing to him. Thus vengeance by the hands of Hermotimos overtook Panionios. After Xerxes had entrusted his sons to Artemisia to carry them back to Ephesus, he called Mardonios and told him to choose from the army whomever he wished, and if possible, to make his deeds correspond to his words. During that day matters went so far. In the night, at the king's command, the leaders of the fleet began to withdraw their ships from Phaleron to the Hellespont, as quickly as each could, in order to guard the bridges for the king to cross over. As the barbarians sailed near Zoster, they saw the small points of rock that stretch out to sea from this part of the mainland, thought these were ships, and fled for a good distance. In time, however, realizing that they were not ships but points of rock, they assembled together again and continued their voyage. When day dawned, the Hellenes saw that the land army was staying still in its place, and they supposed that the ships also were still around Phaleron. Thinking that they would have to fight another sea battle, they made preparations to repel them. But when they were informed that the ships had departed, they immediately thought it best to pursue them. They pursued as far as Andros, but they did not catch sight of the fleet of Xerxes. When they had come to Andros, they deliberated about what they should do. Themistocles declared his opinion that they should take their course through the islands, pursue the ships, and afterwards sail straight to the Hellespont to break up the bridges. Eurybates expressed the opposite opinion, saying that if they broke up the floating bridges, they would thereby do the greatest possible harm to Hellas. For if the Persian were cut off and forced to remain in Europe, he would try not to remain still. If he did remain still, none of his affairs could go forward, nor would any way of returning home appear. Instead, his army would perish of hunger. But if he made the attempt and persisted in it, all Europe might be brought over to him, city by city and nation by nation, with the inhabitants either conquered or surrendering on terms before they were conquered. Moreover, the crops of the Hellenes that grew year by year would provide them with food. Eurybates thought, however, that after being defeated in the sea fight, the Persian would not stay in Europe, and therefore he should be allowed to flee until he reached his own land. Then after that, they might begin the contest for the land belonging to the Persian. The commanders of the other Peloponnesians also adhered to this opinion. When Themistocles perceived that he would not be able to persuade them, or at least the greater number of them, to sail to the Hellespont, he changed his counsel and turned to the Athenians. They were the most grieved at the escape of the enemy, and were eager to sail to the Hellespont even by themselves, if the others were unwilling. To them he spoke as follows. I myself have been present before now on many occasions, and I have heard of many more, when something like this happened. Men who were forced into great straits, after they had been defeated, fought again and repaired their former disaster. As for us, since we have won as a prize from fortune the continued existence of ourselves and of Hellas by repelling from our land so great a cloud of men, let us not pursue enemies who flee from us. It was not we who brought these things about, but the gods and heroes, who begrudged that one man should become king of both Asia and Europe, and he a man unholy and presumptuous, one who made no distinction between sacred and profane things, burning and casting down the images of the gods, and who also scourged the sea and let down fetters into it. As things stand now, it is well for us to remain in Hellas and look after ourselves and our households. Let each man repair his house, and take care to sow his land, after he has completely driven away the barbarian. Then, at the beginning of spring, let us sail down toward the Hellespont in Ionia. He spoke in this way, intending to store up gratitude for himself with the Persian, so that if, after all, any harm should come upon him at the hands of the Athenians, he would have a place of refuge. This was in fact what later happened. Themistocles then spoke in this way in order to deceive them, and the Athenians followed his advice. In former times he had already had the reputation of being a man of ability, and now he had proved himself truly both able and of good judgment. Therefore they were ready in every way to follow his advice when he spoke. When they had been persuaded by him, Themistocles at once sent men in a vessel, men he trusted to keep silent under whatever test they might face about what he had charged them to tell the king. Among them once again was his servant Sikinos. When these men came to Attica, the others stayed behind in the ship, while Sikinos went up to Xerxes and spoke. Themistocles son of Mucles sent me. He is commander of the Athenians, and of all the allies the best and ablest man. He tells you that Themistocles the Athenian, wishing to be of service to you, held back the Hellenes when they wanted to pursue your ships and destroy the bridges on the Hellespont. Now therefore you may make your way home quite undisturbed. After delivering this message, they sailed away again. Meanwhile the Hellenes, having resolved not to pursue the ships of the barbarians any farther and not to sail to the Hellespont to break up the passage, were investing Andros with the intention of taking it. The Andrians were the first of the islanders who, when Themistocles asked them for money, refused to give it. Themistocles made proposals to them and said that the Athenians had come with two great deities on their side, persuasion and compulsion, and therefore the Andrians must by all means give them money. They answered that it now appeared not without reason that Athens was great and prosperous, since the Athenians were well supplied with useful deities. But as for the Andrians, they were poor, having in this respect attained the highest eminence, and two unprofitable deities never left their island, but always remained attached to the place, poverty and helplessness. Since the Andrians were possessed by these deities, they would not give money, for the power of the Athenians could never overcome their inability. These men then, having made this answer and refused to give the money, were being besieged. Themistocles, not ceasing in his desire for gain, sent threatening messages to the other islands and asked them for money through the same envoys, using those whom he had previously sent to the king. He said that if they did not give what was demanded of them, he would bring the fleet of the Hellenes against them to besiege and take them. By saying this he collected great sums of money from the Charestians and the Parians. They had been informed that Andros was being besieged because it had taken the side of the Medes, and that Themistocles was held in higher regard than any of the other commanders, so out of fear they sent money. Whether any of the other islanders also gave money I cannot say, but I think that some others gave, and not these alone. Yet for the Charestians at least there was no respite from evil on this account, while the Parians escaped attack because they propitiated Themistocles with money. Thus Themistocles, using Andros as his starting point, was acquiring sums of money for himself from the men of the islands without the knowledge of the other commanders.
And we will stop there, with the Persian fleet shattered in the strait and Xerxes on his throne above the shore, staring at the ruin of his sea power. Next time, in the last part of the book, part 47, how the frightened king flees back to Asia, how Mardonius stays behind to try again on land, and how Athens, offered everything, gives the proudest answer in her history. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.